Hi, Christopher. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, my pleasure. You live in Halifax, which is very close to me. You're the second Nova Scotian that I've interviewed. This is exciting.
Oh, nice.
Hmm.
Well, I'm very excited to get the interview going.
Good. Well, I know you've written a couple of very interesting books. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But before that, tell us a little bit about yourself, your backstory, a little bit of history about you.
Well, I'm a Nova Scotian country boy that was always more into reading and doodling weird machines as a kid. I think my earliest childhood ambition was to become an inventor. I got very into spirituality as well in my teen years, and I think right now, my creative focus is sort of on ways to combine those seemingly quite disparate worlds. I think we tend to think of the world as either enchanted or technological, but I find it very interesting the overlap. So a lot of the things I write and a lot of the things I think about in my private life these days is around that subject, around the overlap between spirituality and the paranormal and also technology. And I think there's a pretty rich ground for study in that overlap of the Venn diagram.
Hmm. Well, that's very interesting. I have to admit, I haven't heard anybody express that to that in that way.
Hmm.
One of your books is clearly that. I can tell that from just a cover, but I don't quite understand what it's about. Something to do with numbers. Tell us about that.
That's the mindful programming book, I would assume.
That's right.
Yeah. So the inspiration behind that book came from well, there were a couple of inspirations, but the theme that it coalesced around was this idea that throughout history, there's often been professions that had some kind of an esoteric component. So alchemy is a great example, I think. You know, alchemists were making mostly medicines. But at the same time, there was this strong aspect of an inner work that the alchemist was trying to perfect the philosopher's stone, but that was also a metaphor for perfecting himself. Freemasonry is a similar thing, but with temple building. You know, the Temple of Solomon. Originally, that was very much a practical art, but there was also this idea that if you were a better mason, you were also a better person, and vice versa.
Hmm.
Samurai were similar around sword fighting. So I had kind of been interested in a peripheral way in these sorts of esoteric schools around professions. And I was also, at the time, I was working quite intensely on a hobby project to make some artificial, it was called machine learning at the time. These days, I guess they're calling it artificial intelligence again, but I was working quite diligently in programming in my spare time. And I kind of had the idea, programming might be an example of a profession that can have this sort of esoteric aspect. So I meant to write just sort of an essay or a couple of essays, maybe a blog post or something around that. But it was one of those subjects that kind of it didn't converge the way subjects usually do when you write about them. Most things I write about, um, they package themselves very quickly. It's almost hard to write a lot about most subjects, even most subjects that I find quite interesting. But this particular one, actually, every time I wrote about something, there'd be a couple of loose ends, and then I'd write about one of the loose ends, and that would lead farther and farther. And at some point, I thought, this is probably going to be a book length project, and I've never written a book, so I'll just go for it. And that's how that book came about. Yeah, it was a very interesting process.
Hmm.
As for the cover, one of the major things that I talk about in it is belief systems and the kind of Taoist idea of heaven and earth being this very mental or very physical sort of model of the world. And the correlation between that and the zeros and ones kind of seemed very poetic, the zeros and ones of a computer program. And then the linguistic, the mediating nature of linguistics, which is a key part of programming, kind of added the deltas in there. So that's the zeros and ones and deltas that are on the cover. It's a reference to a number of different themes that kind of pop up in the book.
You know what this kind of reminds me of? We're going back to the 70s. There's a book written by Robert Pirsig called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, it's
yeah,
about
it's not quite
motorcycle
as
maintenance, but it's also, it gets very existential, and it crosses boundaries back and forth. It was difficult for me to read when I was young, but later on I reread it and I really got a lot of stuff out of that. Yeah. Is it something like
yeah.
that?
It's I would not put my work next to Persig's. That Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, in my opinion, is a real classic. But I think there's definitely there's an aspect in Persig's in that book in particular about the juxtaposition of the ordinary and the practical with the mystical and transcendent. And I definitely, I mean, I think it wasn't a direct influence on the style of the book, but I think my interest in this tradition of occupations that are also a metaphor for self-discovery and discovery of the divine, I think that interest was probably influenced by reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's this finding the magic in the everyday that I think that book really captures in a profound way, in which I don't think I capture the feel of it quite the same way in the book. There's not a lot of narrative the way Zen and the Art of Motorcycle
Yeah, I
Maintenance
know it's
has.
about a motorcycle trip with his son, and it's, yeah, it's, that's, and then the backdrop. That's the backdrop. But getting away from that book, back to yours. Is it a
Oh.
technical book, or is it a spiritual book, or is it both, or how do you tell the story?
Mm, so the place I start off with is that we kind of see our minds as being similar to computers, which is probably not because they're a lot like computers, but because we don't have any better metaphors for what a mind is like. And starting with that skill, I say, all right, so if say your mind is more like a computer than any other machine humans have come up with, um, what are the elements of working with a computer, and how can that help you work with your mind? And in programming, there's kind of three key skills which not every programmer needs to be good at all of them, but every project needs someone who's good at one of them. And those are, choosing the project to work on, writing the code, and debugging the code. And those all have sort of, if you think about yourself, your habits, your deeper structures as something that's sort of solid, but also something that you have the ability to edit, and actually something that you are constantly editing. The thoughts we think with change the landscape that we think them in. Um, then those three skills sort of have analogs between writing in a computer and working with your own mind and your own beliefs and reactions, and the architecture is what I call it. So
Mhm.
the way I talk about it being similar is that the human mind is like it's like the electricity running through a computer architecture. So if you have a computer architecture that it actually limits where things can go, and similarly our neural patterns limit where the energy of our minds can go. And at the same time, as we are expanding that energy, we're also changing the architecture. So the architecture of a program, the architecture of the substrate. I don't like to use the term brain because I do think that much of the important neural tissue isn't in the brain at all. It's all through the body. But the neural structure, that architecture and the architecture of a computer program, there are parallels. And I kind of, the first 3/4 of the book, I talk about these three key skills as things that show up over and over, and I talk about different aspects of both. And then in the last quarter, I get a little more speculative and talk about futurism and Roko's basilisk and the neural architecture of society as being similar once you're in that mind space of exploring your own architecture, and as it being something you change by moving through it, then you start to see that in the world as well. So I talk about that a little in the last portion of the book as well. But the original, I would say the more hard parts of it are the first portion where I talk about these three key skills, choosing your priorities, putting something in place, and then cleaning up what you've put in place. Those are, I would say those are maybe the parts I'm more confident on. Those are the parts that have actual advice for anyone who's looking to relate these fields, whichever one they're more familiar with. And then the last part it's a little more for me for futurism and
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah.
now your experience is mainly in programming. Have you got any knowledge, or did you go to school or learn about the mind, the brain, or spiritual things? Did you go to theological seminary, any of that? Or did you have to do research for the book to see if you could make a connection between programming and the mind?
So I've been a lifelong meditator. The traditions that I've learned from are mostly Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhism. But then I've also, around the time that I was getting into writing this book, I was also very much studying Western esotericism, so perennial philosophy, Hermetic philosophy, mm, those kinds of schools, the alchemical method. So I think the the case I make in the book is that there are different types of spiritual schools where some go more and more abstract and some go more and more realized, and that the nature of programming as a style of study is maybe more of the third kind, which mediates between the abstraction and the manifestation. You might say like Plato is very abstract and Aristotle is very manifest. There's all these little details, and I find Western esotericism as a whole is very detailed
Mm-hmm.
compared to the more abstract kind of Buddhism that I grew up with. But I think ultimately the the work that one does in doing spiritual exploration, it doesn't immediately make it easy to articulate what comes out of that work.
Yeah.
I think there's a reason that most of the great teachers spoke in allegory so much. And I think that maybe that's one reason why people use their professions as an allegory for this kind of thing, because it makes it a little more accessible. So I would say the language is more around programming. I intended it to be very accessible to someone who maybe doesn't believe in the supernatural or the kinds of strange events that I believe in, that I've observed myself. So I use a quite matter of fact, Western modern scientific language to describe these things. But I would say a lot of the experiences are also, personal experiences that I've gathered over the years.
We hear a lot about spirituality. It's a kind of a hard to define word, but I'm going to
Hmm.
ask you, how do you differentiate between spirituality and religion?
Hmm. Hmm. I would say it is a matter of where the impetus comes from. I would say both deal with a lot of the same realities, both seek to answer a lot of the same questions. But I would say in spirituality, it's usually the motivation comes from uh, one person or a small group of people. Whereas in religion, I would say it more comes from the community. Uh, I would say that in both, you can go to a more abstracted or a more manifest kind of an understanding of the connection between um, great minds and local minds or small minds.
Hmm.
But I would say that the major difference between spirituality and religion, as I see it, is the community coming together um, to to do whatever it is that you're there to do. It could be various different things, or is a smaller individual mind seeking to contact something larger. The other book that I wrote is actually entirely in verse. I really like the poetic side of composition in that sense. So I tried to give it like a pleasant cadence when I was arranging the different pieces.
And what is that one about?
So that one's called Health Advice for Young Dragons. It's a children's book. Um, the inspiration behind that one was looking at my own kind of health habits. I noticed that a lot of the things that made the biggest difference to my own health were just very simple, easy to remember principles that I learned at a very young age. So one of the ones that I remembered that I make reference to in that book is that if you're unsure if a food is good for you, pay attention to how your stomach feels. Your taste buds can be fooled, but your stomach generally lets you know whether a food is something you should put in your body or something you should not put in your body. Um, and it made me think, simple pieces of solid, memorable advice like that, given at a young age, are just so much more valuable than a lot of the more extreme things we try to do as adults, where it doesn't feel as natural and doesn't feel as part of
Mhm.
one's own identity. So that's a book written for children, rhyming. It's actually a lot of it is based on my understanding of five elements healing
Mhm.
and five elements medicine, but I relate the four elements to food, drink, sleep, and breath, and as those being elements of health that one needs to bring into harmony. And then I also talk about the fifth element as play, and the need for the
You're
fifth
right.
element is it's
Yeah.
a hard one in in Western
It
esotericism.
seems that way, isn't it? I mean, I figured it out. I figured that
Mhm.
out by grade three, but play is a big part. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I talk about the five elements of health in that context. I got a really cool. I think he's a manga artist to do the illustrations. So I'm really happy with how that one turned out. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks very nice. So these two books that you've written, they're nonfiction.
Yeah. I'd say so.
Are you planning to write any more books?
Yes, actually, I've got a couple of projects that I'm quite excited by. Uh, Actually, one of them I'm co-authoring with ChatGPT, which is I don't know how this project is going to turn out, but there's a website called Spurious Correlations, which just gathers a whole bunch of government statistics and finds correlation between various ones. So, for example, the per capita margarine consumption seems to correlate with divorce rates. In Maine, in particular, just in the state of Maine, which is probably completely coincidental. You know, you have enough data sets like that, you can find correlations like that.
Yeah.
But I had the idea, I've always liked stories with conspiracies or like a supernatural element. Um, so what I've been doing now for this next kind of, and this is just a book of fiction stories, is I've been getting ChatGPT to write me noir detective stories where it's always the detective has to figure out the conspiracy that's causing margarine consumption to correlate with the divorce rate in Maine. Um, so that's just it's a fun little side project.
Okay.
As you can probably tell from my choice of subjects, I'm quite interested in technology and the the role it plays in our society and how we interact with it. So with something like that, which is it's sort of a pattern recognition robot, um, I thought it would be a really cool project to get it to try and recognize. You give it two prompts and then get it to recognize the pattern between them.
Yeah.
So
Well, you
yeah,
mentioned,
that's a book I'm working on right now that will be fiction. Won't be written entirely by me, of course. But
yeah, you say you're going to co-write it with someone else. Yeah, interesting. I've often wondered how co-writing with someone works. How do you co-write?
well, I say I'm co-writing with ChatGPT, which is this AI program that it's essentially it's a chatbot with a very large training set. So it can kind of write short stories, and then so I've been giving it subjects to write a short story on, and then editing it. Um,
Okay. Well, I didn't expect that as an answer. You're a fascinating gentleman. Any final words on your work and the future that you see for yourself?
oh my goodness. I think we live in such an interesting time in history. And I'm just so grateful that I get to live in a time when the feeling of this era, when I can just record that in a medium that potentially will be around for quite a long time. Um, so I think it's something that I think is so cool, and I hope more people discover the joy of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. As far back as I could remember back as a teenager, I said, I want to write a book. I want to write a book. My
Mhm.
20s, 30s, 40s. I want to write a book. But, how do you do that? Now it's just a lot of work, but you can do it, right? You're right.
Mm-hmm,
It's a
hmm.
great time to be alive.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Christopher, this has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. And I wish you all the best moving forward with any projects that you're going to be working with AI. Now that I got to see. I got to check that
Ooh.
out. When you write that, make sure that you contact me and we're going to have a chat about that book too.
All right. Well,
All right.
I look forward to that. It
Okay, sir.
might be fairly soon.
Okay, sir. Well, it was really nice having you on the show, and I wish you well.
Great to be here. Thank you so much, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really like to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.